Hi, I'm Jaclyn.
And I'm Courtney, and this is Caffeinated Crimes.
Welcome back. I know for you guys, we just had an episode last week, but for us, it's been a couple weeks since we recorded a regular episode, so we are super excited to be back in the midst of things. Hopefully, you guys saw our Instagram post that I went to Tennessee, so I got to see Courtney in person for the first time in 10 months.
Yeah, since this podcast had been started, we hadn't seen each other. So it's been too long. Thanks COVID for that. But
yes.
And I mean, I'm thinking back to like our first episodes and we're like, oh, in like 2 weeks I'm gonna see you, and then it never happened, but it finally happened. We finally saw each other. We had a lot of good times.
Yes, it was magical, and we got to wear our Caffeinated Crimes shirts together and do a whole photo shoot, so be on the lookout for some more of those coming soon. Also, Courtney said I had to make sure and tell you guys that I ate Taco Bell, and I kind of liked it. So
yes.
Andrew and I were on the way back home from Tennessee, and it was like 8 or 8:30 by the time we stopped for dinner, and where we stopped, like, everywhere was closed. I was so sad because I literally pulled up to the Panera drive-thru, and it's like, thank you for coming to Panera, like, our operating hours are, and I'm like, oh no. So the only place at that exit was Taco Bell, and I was like, okay, whatever, like, we'll get Taco Bell, it's fine. And as I mentioned before, I haven't had Taco Bell in like 6 years, but I got a chicken quesadilla, and it was pretty tasty. So I texted Courtney, and I was like, Courtney, guess what I'm eating? And then Courtney just texted back in all caps, is it Taco Bell? So
I got excited. Yeah, the chicken quesadilla is really good.
Yeah, it was tasty. So I enjoyed it. So
they have some pretty good items. I really wish you could have tried some of the black bean items. I mean, they still have the crunch wrap, but I don't think it'd be as good as the quesarito was.
Yeah. But, you know, I don't know. Maybe there's more Taco Bell in my future, so.
That's what I like to hear. See, I convert people to the Taco Bell.
Yes. So Courtney has a true crime update about a case that we did recently.
I do. If you guys listened to my last espresso, it was about Holly Bobo, and I did mention that Jason Autry was still waiting trial. It looks like he was officially sentenced, and so he was sentenced to 8 years in prison for his role, but he also ended up being released for time served. So on Wednesday, September 16th, he was officially released. All the articles I saw said it was like a deal with the devil because it seems like he had a lot to do with it. But he was also a key witness in Zach Adams' trial. So, yep, that is a little update. He has been sentenced and released. So, he's out in the world again.
Yeah, not great news.
No.
Kind of sad.
Because the articles were like, I mean, Holly, like, got justice because he was convicted, but now he's also released, so.
Yeah, but did she really? I don't know. But at least, I mean, other participants are still in prison, so that's promising.
Because it seems like Zach Adams was, like, the ringleader, like, the person who really started it, so I guess when you don't have much evidence, you have to use what you have to use.
Yep. So that's all of our true crime updates for now, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're just going to get into today's episode. This is a rough one. It was really hard to research. Courtney and I were not very familiar with this case, so I don't know if our listeners are familiar with it, but today we're going to do the Freeway Phantom Killings, and a lot of our information came from a Washington Post article, some court documents, the blog Talk Murder With Me, and also the podcast The Murder Squad with Billy Jensen and Paul Holes. So that's where all of our information today came from. So from April 1971 to September 1972, 6 young black girls were abducted and murdered along the streets of Washington, D.C. This string of murders will be called the Freeway Phantom Killings. Their killer has never been caught. The first victim was 13-year-old Carol Spinks. Carol was a 7th grader at Johnson Junior High School. She was an identical twin, and she loved jumping rope, playing jacks, and hula hooping. On April 25th, 1971, Carol went to the local 7-Eleven for her 24-year-old sister. Her sister gave her $5 to buy TV dinners, bread, and soda. Their mother had been visiting an aunt in Maryland and told the younger children to not leave the home while she was gone. Her mother actually saw her when she was on the way home from the store and told her to go straight home and that she would be disciplined later for leaving the house against her mother's instructions. Carol was abducted somewhere between her home and the 4 blocks to the grocery store. When her mother got home that night and discovered that Carol had never made it home, she searched the neighborhoods with family and friends, and she did file a missing persons report later that night. Carol's body was found 6 days later on May 1st. She was located behind St. Elizabeth's Hospital on a grassy embankment near Interstate 295 when some children playing had found her body and called the police. She had been strangled and sexually assaulted. There were defensive wounds on her body and she had a bloody nose. Her shoes were missing and green synthetic fibers were found on her clothing, which was the same clothing she had been wearing the day she disappeared. Based on her stomach contents, it appeared that she had been murdered several days before, and police believed her killer had kept her alive for several days after abducting her. It appeared he had fed her some kind of citrus fruit, so she had been alive for multiple days since she went missing, and he had fed her. And there were no immediate leads in this case. Then Darlinia Denise Johnson worked at the Oxen Run Rec Center the summer of 1971. She was 16 years old. She was reported missing when she failed to show up to work on July 9th. 2 witnesses reported seeing Darlinia. One said she was with her boyfriend, and the other said she was with an older black man in an older black car. But neither of these leads went anywhere. And then a few days later, a D.C. Department of Highways and Traffic employee stopped on the side of the interstate because he was having car trouble, and he discovered the body of a young black girl. So he called the D.C. police to report this, and the police had already received a call that morning about the body. So the police drove by, but they didn't see anything, so they just kept going and didn't get out of their car to investigate.
Like, what?
So I just want to take a moment here.
What?
Yes, they received 2 reports of a body on the side of the road, and they just drove by and they're like, oh, nope, didn't see anything. Must have been a mistake. First of all, that would be absurd if it was 1 report of a body, but you received 2 reports of a body in the same place, and you just kept going.
And it's like off of like the interstate as well, so I'm like,
yes.
Are you driving like 55 to 70 down the road and you're like, don't see anything? Like, pull over, like that's your job.
Exactly. So a week later, on July 19th, one of the citizens who phoned the police drove by and saw that the body was still there. So someone who had already called the police a week later drives by and sees this body again. Like, how hard did you look for this body?
Yeah. I'd be pissed if I was that person. I would be going to like every news station and being like, look what happened.
Exactly.
I called like 2 times.
Like, how many times do you have to report a body on the side of the interstate? So the man called his boss, who then called his friend, which was D.C. Police Sergeant Charles Baden. So Baden was off duty that day, but he drove to the scene and rode his motorcycle along the shoulder of the interstate until he found the body. Which kind of answers your question of, did they just drive on by? Probably, because just riding his motorcycle slowly along the shoulder, he found the body.
Yeah.
So obviously, by this point, the remains were badly decomposed due to the heat and the humidity and the fact that she had been there for so long. But fingerprints did determine that the body was that of Darlinia Johnson. And she was found only 15 feet away from where they found Carol's body. So they couldn't determine the cause of death due to the state of decomp, but her shoes were also missing, just like Carol's had been.
Yeah, and if you're the police as well, if you had just found a body, not that long ago in this area and you hear another one, like, you should be like high alert and you're like, oh no, this is not good, like, exactly. I need to investigate this like thoroughly. And like, especially because like we see so much too, like when bodies are placed certain places, like if it's near woods there could be animals, like you could ruin so much of the evidence. Like, just do your job.
It doesn't make any sense. So this one's extra sad. So Brenda Faye Crockett was the youngest of the Freeway Phantom Killings, and she was only 10 years old. Brenda had lots of friends, and she loved attending church and having her photo taken. And I don't know why, but just like that one sentence just like got to me, because I just picture this little girl who's just like so fun and carefree, and it's like, oh, I love like hanging out with my friends and like take my picture, like just so like pure and innocent.
Yeah. Like on the Murder Squad like website, which I was looking at, that had a lot of like their information, it had pictures, and just seeing all their faces and like seeing her and she's just 10. Like, they're all
Yes.
horrific, but it's just like seeing all their faces and just thinking, like, who could do this? Like,
I know.
why? Like, I don't know. This one's rough.
It's really rough. So, Brenda went to the grocery store to buy bread and dog food on July 27th at around 8 p.m. When she didn't return home after an hour, her mom went looking for her and left her 7-year-old daughter, Bertha, home with her boyfriend. So this abduction was a little bit different from the previous 2 victims because Brenda actually called home at 9:20 p.m. and spoke to her little sister, saying a white man had snatched her and taken her to Virginia, but she was taking a cab home. So another phone call came into the home about 25 minutes later, and this time Brenda spoke to her mom's boyfriend, and she asked if her mom had seen her. So the boyfriend was really confused because Brenda had said that she was in Virginia, and so he asked her to put the man on the call, and then Brenda whispers, quote, "Well, I'll see you," and then the line went dead. And that's just...
Yeah. If you're, like, that sister or the mom's boyfriend, like, that just has to be, like, remembering that happened. It's just horrible.
So 8 hours after Brenda went missing, her remains were found by a hitchhiker on Route 50 in Cheverly, just across the D.C. line in Virginia. She had also been sexually assaulted and strangled. A scarf was tied around her neck, and green synthetic fibers were also found on her remains. So Brenda had left home without shoes, so it wasn't unusual that she was found barefoot, but her feet were washed clean. So obviously if she had been walking to the grocery store and back, like, her feet would have been dirty, but they were completely clean. So one of the detectives, Romaine Jenkins, so just a little tidbit that I thought was super interesting, in the Washington Post article that interviewed Romaine, who is still alive today and still very obviously haunted by these cases. So she was, I believe, 27 or 28 years old at the time of these murders, and these cases were assigned to her because she was childless, and they said that it was too difficult on the men with children to work these cases, so that's why she got assigned to the case, which was just crazy to me.
Kind of weird, yeah.
Yeah. So Detective Jenkins had a theory about these phone calls. So she believes that the abductor knew Brenda's mother and wanted to make sure that she had not seen him with Brenda and could identify him. So that would play into the theory of why this one was different from all the other victims. So this next one, we might be mispronouncing her name. Unfortunately, we couldn't find any, like, videos or, radio clips or anything that says the name, so we're really sorry if we're mispronouncing it. But Nino Moshiach Yates was 12 years old, and she was a 6th grader at Kelly Miller Junior High School. She left her apartment to go to a local Safeway store around 7 p.m. on October 1st, 1971, to buy flour, sugar, and paper plates. Her stepmom had just had a baby, and her dad was at the hospital with her. And it's unknown if she ever made it to the grocery store. Her body was discovered within hours of going to the store, and it was still warm to the touch. Nino Moshiach's remains were found by a teenager on Pennsylvania Avenue in Prince George County, Maryland. She had also been sexually assaulted and strangled, and green synthetic fibers were found on her remains as well. So after this murder, the killer received the nickname the Freeway Phantom, and police now believe that they have a serial killer, which would be the first known serial killer in Washington, D.C. Now, Brenda Denise Woodward was the oldest victim at the age of 18. She had gone out to dinner with friends the night of November 15th. One of her friends from school usually drove her home, but his car was in the shop, so she took the bus home. And her friends last saw her getting off the bus at 8th and H Street to transfer to a different bus. And her body was discovered just 6 hours later, just before 5 a.m., south of Route 202 near Prince George's Hospital by a policeman on patrol. She had been sexually assaulted, strangled, and stabbed 4 times. Defensive wounds on her hands suggested that she had fought back. Her coat was draped over her, and her turtleneck was inside out, and both her coat and her skirt were missing buttons. And this one also has a different interesting element to it. So inside her pocket, police found a note, and it said, quote, "This is tantamount to my insensitivity to people, especially women. I will admit the others when you can catch me if you can. Signed, the Freeway Phantom." And insensitivity was spelled wrong on the note. So the FBI determined that this note was written by Brenda based on the handwriting samples, and they believed that the killer had been telling her what to write. Now, this part was kind of weird to me, but I'm going to say it anyway. But they believed that her writing was normal and with punctuation, so therefore she knew the killer and had not been nervous while she was writing this note. because Detective Jenkins said, quote, "You don't think calmly like that if someone has kidnapped and assaulted you." So, I mean, maybe, but also I don't think you can really infer from the neatness of someone's handwriting whether or not they knew the person who was dictating them what to write. Like, that just seems a little far-fetched to me.
And we also don't know, like, was this the first note he had her write?
Exactly.
Or did he make her keep doing it until it looked normal? And, like, with punctuation, like, anyone who uses voice to text knows that you just say, like, especially women, period. Like, put a period. Like,
yeah.
He was probably telling her exactly how to write it. Not,
exactly.
Here, write these words down. Like,
and even if, like, he just said the words and she added punctuation, like, that doesn't mean that she knew him. And, like you said, like, maybe she had written this before and he was like, no, that's too messy, like, no one can read it, like, write it again. Or maybe she just had neat handwriting and maybe, like, her hands weren't physically shaking. Like, just because you've been abducted doesn't mean that your body is going to respond in all the same ways that someone else that's been abducted would. So it just, to me, that seemed a little far-fetched.
And you have so much adrenaline, too,
yeah.
and you might be like, if I do this, maybe he'll let me go. You know what I mean? Like, you're probably just trying
yeah.
to survive, and so, yeah, that's very
That's
odd.
what I thought, too.
Like, I wonder if it was, like, reopened, if they would just, like, throw that bit out, because
and I don't know if that was, like, if that played a role into the investigation where they're like, oh, we ruled out these people because there was no connection. I don't know if they went that far or if it was just kind of a theory.
This is what, yeah.
But, again, to me it was like, I don't know about that personally.
So, 10 months passed with no additional victims, and police were starting to believe that he just left the area or maybe he was in jail for other crimes. But then the body of Diane Denise Williams was found on September 6, 1972 by a trucker who'd pulled off on the side of the road. Diane was 17 years old, and she was a junior at Ballou Senior High School. She had gone out with her boyfriend the night before on September 5th. He'd walked her to the bus stop at around 11:20 p.m., and it was the last time she was seen alive. Her body was found along Interstate 295, just 200 yards south of the D.C. line. And she'd been strangled, but unlike the other victims, she did still have her shoes, and Diane had been written on one of her shoes, and she had $1.26 in her pocket. So then in 1974, a task force was created, but also this is 2 years after the last murder. So, a little late there.
Yeah. Like, you've had 4 murders of these black girls on the side of the road, and you wait 2 years after the last murder, which took place 10 months after the others, to create this task force. Like, what have you been doing in this investigation the whole time?
Yeah. So it was a large task force, and they completed a lot of interviews and interrogations, but no solid conclusions came to this case. So one of the Green Vega Rapists was a gang who were known for abducting and raping women in the Washington, D.C., Maryland area, and they became prime suspects, which, I mean, for good reason, if that's what your reputation is. And they also always abducted women along the freeway, and many of the girls who were murdered were around the same age that the gang targeted as well, so seeming like pretty good suspects.
Yeah.
And one of the gang members did snitch on another gang member, claiming he had special information about the murders. But when they interviewed him, all the information he gave was just things that were reported in the media by the police. And when police did interview the suspected gang member, he denied any involvement. I mean, of course. Yeah. But he was also able to provide an alibi to the police on where he was that night. They also tested their hairs, and none of them matched the ones found on the bodies. So another strong suspect was Robert Askins. He was a computer technician and had been sentenced to St. Elizabeth's Psychiatric Hospital after poisoning a sex worker in 1938. So he had laced 5 glasses of whiskey with potassium cyanide and proposed a toast with 5 sex workers. 4 of them did survive, but 31-year-old Ruth McDonald died. And his conviction on this was overturned based on a legal technicality, and he was released in 1958. Thanks, whoever messed that up.
Yeah, I'm like, you murdered 1 woman, but also attempted murder of 4 more, but okay, just go on back into the world. It's fine.
Yeah, very odd. His home was searched in 1977, and they found writings that used the word tantamount, the same word used in a note on Diane's body, which I find that very interesting. That's not a word I usually use in my vocabulary.
Yes, that is super interesting.
And I don't know if maybe that time, that was a word people just loved to use, or, like, how there's some words or some phrases people used more so back in a different decade. I don't know, but that is a very specific word to me.
Yes.
To be using. They also found dirty women's scarves, photos of young girls, and a knife used in another crime. They found 2 buttons and a gold earring in his car, but there was nothing substantial to tie him to these victims. They also did not find the green fibers in his home that had been found on several bodies. Additionally, hairs that were found on the bodies were tested, and they did not match Askins. Several years later, Askins was convicted of kidnapping and raping 2 other women in D.C. and received a life sentence. He did die in prison on April 30th, 2010 at 91 years old. So there were multiple suspects that were cleared based on hair analysis, but recent studies have found hair analysis is kind of unreliable and accurate. It's not the best. Mm-hmm. The Innocence Project has found at least 74 individuals who were convicted based on hair analysis and later exonerated by DNA.
Yeah, so I didn't know if this could go both ways, where they were like, oh no, it's definitely not a match, but because it's so inaccurate, it's like, well, maybe it could have been a match. Like, could you definitively rule these people out using this method if you can't definitively prove that it was someone with that method? And it may not go both ways, but definitely an important thing to consider in this case.
Yeah, I mean, I would feel like if you were only ruled out because of the hair, that you probably should be, like, kind of looked at again. We'll get a little bit more into that as well. One of the police theories is that the killer lived near his first 2 victims, as they were abducted within blocks of each other, and their bodies were found just feet apart, and they believed he would have started his crimes where he was most comfortable. Which, my thing also is so many of the girls were found so soon after they were kidnapped, and I'm like, I feel like if you were going to, like, kidnap, rape, and murder someone, like, you would have to do this somewhere not in public. So
exactly,
to me it would make sense if he lived near all this, or maybe had a spot he went to, because I feel like people would see, like, a lot of these are, like, kind of, like, in daylight,
yeah, and you're not going to be taking this person blocks or miles to get to the place that you're going to kill them. Like, it makes more sense that you would have somewhere private close by. So it definitely makes sense that he would live really close.
So these crimes also happened around the same time as Watergate. So most of the nation's attention was on that, especially in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. And this was also the 1970s, and all of the victims were African American. So it's impossible to ignore in the true crime community how police and media focus more on white victims rather than black victims. And the families of the victims really think the same thing and wonder if these crimes would have been solved if the girls had been white. Mm-hmm. And in 1972, Tommy Musgrove joined the police force, and he agreed that race may have played a part in it.
Which I think also plays a huge part in why neither of us were familiar with this case, because it just wasn't as reported on as 6 white girls abducted from blocks within their homes, raped, murdered, left on the side of the street. Like, those you typically hear about, so... Yeah.
So, Detective Jenkins had the case reopened in 1987 when she was working for the U.S. Attorney's Office. She reviewed FBI files, revisited crime scenes, and re-interviewed witnesses. When Jenkins requested the missing persons report for Darlinia, the young officer who delivered it to her informed her that her sister, Diane, was one of the victims. She said Diane's family received odd phone calls during the time she was missing, and even someone saying, "I killed your daughter," which, that's horrible.
Yeah.
And if you'll remember, the last person to see Diane alive was her boyfriend. He was never interviewed by police because his mother refused to let him talk to them. And Jenkins attempted to have DNA tested on the evidence at this time, but the evidence was, like, really poorly preserved, and so no DNA was able to be found. Other evidence has been lost or stolen, and so a lot of forensic testing we have available today is just not an option anymore because they decided to not preserve this serial killer's DNA. basically.
Yeah.
And basically that is where the case stands today, and a lot of people have very little hope that this case is going to be solved because there's no more DNA, there's no suspects. It's been almost 50 years, I think I was reading. Like,
yeah,
it's tragic, and it's horrible because these girls deserve to have their stories told, but no one's talking about it.
Yeah. And when Courtney and I first started researching this, we were like, okay, like, there's going to be a good amount of information, because usually with unsolved cases, you have all the different directions that the investigation is going, you have different suspects to talk about, and then literally, guys, so we are 27 minutes into this episode, and I don't think we started talking about this until about 4 minutes in, and this is all of the information we can find online. Like, this is it. This is 100% of the information that we can find available. If you guys know of more information, please let us know, because we would love to look into that. But, like, it's awful that we couldn't find anything else about this investigation. I mean, even in terms of, like, what they investigated then, other than the few suspects that they had, what else were they doing in that time? They didn't set up a task force until, like, 3 years after the first series of murders were committed, when obviously they had a serial killer on the loose targeting young black girls, but they didn't even create a task force until 3 years later.
Yeah. And there is a book out there called Tantamount about these, but we did read some skeptical reviews about grammar. I did also read that it was very biased, so we didn't know if that was a reliable source. It's kind of tricky sometimes with books to know how reliable they are. Yeah. So it is out there if you guys want to read that, or if you have read it and want to tell us something maybe that we didn't include. But it just really seems like there's just not any, like, solid information about any of it, you know?
Yeah.
There's barely any suspects. There's no evidence left. Like, it's so sad.
Yeah, and the Washington Post article that we used interviewed, like I said, one of the main detectives on the case, so I feel like that article would have the most, like, up-to-date and accurate information that's out there, and even that was very limited. So we really felt it was important to tell this story, and we really wish that there was more information out there. We mentioned it at the top of the episode, but make sure you guys go listen to the episode that the Murder Squad did, because they do have information on who you can contact if you or anyone you know has information about this case. If you guys aren't familiar with the Murder Squad, that's kind of what they do. They cover these cold cases just to get the stories out there in case anyone knows someone that was in DC in the 70s and would be able to say, oh, like, I think I might have this piece of evidence that maybe was never brought to light until now. So I highly recommend that you guys check out that episode as well.
Yeah, and I'll just go ahead and reread all those victims' names as well.
Yes.
So there was Carol Spinks, Darlinia Denise Johnson, Brenda Faye Crockett, Nino Moshiach Yates, Brenda Denise Woodward, and Diane Denise Williams.
And these are only the victims that we're aware of. There may have been more victims where maybe the bodies weren't found, and so they weren't really tied in together. There was also that huge 10-month gap between the murders, so maybe the killer was somewhere else during this time and murdered more people wherever that was, because it's very unusual for a killer to just stop for that period of time. So,
and, you know, he stopped after, 1972. He didn't kill again in the DC area, but, I mean, if you've been up there, you can get to Maryland, Virginia, you can get everywhere really quick. So he could have just easily moved and continued this spree elsewhere. So if you know of maybe cases where multiple young girls are kidnapped and shoes are missing and sounds like this, I mean, please go to the Murder Squad and submit it. Any tip you think you have, just submit it to them, because even if you think it might be irrelevant, like, it could be very, very relevant. Absolutely.
And we know how unlikely police departments were to share information in the 70s, still kind of now, but especially in the 70s, and even more so for a case that they deemed less important. So, yeah, so unfortunately this is a short episode, but I think it's important that we just leave it where it is, because I think it's really important to acknowledge the lack of available information. But please, like we said, let us know if you guys are aware of other information out there about these cases. So, yeah, it's very important to tell these stories, and
I know it's short, but we have a 2-parter coming up for you guys. That's probably going to be 2 very long episodes.
Yes.
So we'll make up for it. And if you're just like, this amount of time's not enough, you can go to our Patreon, and we have a few bonus episodes there.
Yeah, definitely do that. All right, Courtney, what is your perk of the week?
Okay, my perk of the week is I got to see you.
That is the best
I finally
perk of the week.
got to see you. I finally got to hang out with you. I got to sit and drink mimosas with you and Tiffany and eat cake and eat food, and it was so fun.
You know, I'm still thinking about those bundt cakes. Just randomly, they'll pop into my head. I'm like, man, I really want some of those. So
they're so good. So good. If you have a nothing bundt cake near you, because it's kind of like a little like franchise type, one of those weird things, you know, where you can like open your own store. I don't know, it's very weird.
That's called a franchise.
Got you guys. If you have one near you, go get the red velvet one.
Yes.
If you like red velvet, the chocolate's good too. Get any of them, and they are delicious. Jaclyn, what is your perk of the week?
So I'm gonna do like I do and do a 2-part perk of the week. So,
ooh.
My first part is obviously the same as your perk of the week, that I finally got to see you, and see some of my other friends and see my family. We did a lot of outdoor things and tried to social distance as much as possible, but it was just a really, really good time actually getting to be with people for the first time in, like I said, it's been like 10 months since I've seen you. It's been over a year since I went home to see my family. So that was amazing. Also, my second part of my perk of the week is that football started back this week. So that's super exciting.
Yes.
Very different this year, obviously, with COVID. And so if you guys are not in the United States, so some states are allowing like fans at sporting events and some are not. So you have some where there's like a few fans, and then you have some where there's none, and depending on where you're located, but it does bring some normalcy back to the world and gives us something to do on Sunday afternoons now, so super excited about that.
Yeah, I'm very happy football's back. Kevin and I are kind of resuming our, like, you know, we watch football and we hang out and just chill on Sundays, and it's so nice, and I love it, and hopefully the Titans do good this year. Your Bengals are off to a little bit of a rocky start, but
yeah, we've lost 2 games, but we also look better than we did last year.
So. Joe Burrow looks great, but
he does.
Can we just talk?
Super excited.
I need to tell you this story. So, Kevin and I watch Red Zone, and if you don't know what the NFL Red Zone is, basically it just shows all the games, like the important parts. So you don't have to watch like the whole. If you know, we watch the Titans game, but the other games, like we don't really care to sit down and watch every single play. So Red Zone will just show us the most important ones and flip back and forth. So we're watching that, and it goes to the Bengals game, that first game, and it's that kick, and if they get the kick, it'll win. And it just, woo, right to the right. And then the kicker, like, grabs his leg, and I was like, I saw the replay, and I was like, Kevin, I think he's faking it.
Same.
It. And then in an interview, I don't remember exactly what it was, and he was like, yeah, like, my left leg just cramped up. And then people were like, in the video, you grabbed your other leg. Like, he was literally, like, inconsistent. And I was like, he literally knew he messed up and was like, oh, my leg.
That's what I said. I was like, he is so faking that. Like, there is no way. Like, you just bombed that kick, and you were like, oh, no, I better be hurt because I'm about to get shamed walking out of the stadium.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing, too, is I was like, if you watch the replay, you saw him kick and then walk, and as he saw it going, like, that way, he started grabbing his leg, and I was like, he faked that. No. Which we can't say much because the Titans kicker did not do very well at their game, but anyway.
Which, I mean, and Andrew always says, like, a game shouldn't come down to a kick anyway, so obviously it's, like, super frustrating, but again, like, we should have played better to not be in a position that we had to have that kick.
That's what I always say, too.
So we played on Sunday, and then we played again the Thursday night game, and so when it was time for us to kick, I was like, oh, do we even have a kicker? Is he hurt? And Andrew's like, oh, no, he's fine. And I'm like, of course he is. I knew he would be. So...
Yeah, so there's your little story. But yeah, I'm very happy football's back. It's nice to just sit and relax and watch it. And the weather is starting to feel like fall. Like 2020 has like ruined so many things for us, but like the weather is actually feeling very fallish around me, which usually doesn't happen. So maybe 2020 I'll give you a tiny slide at the moment.
We're having a redemption arc here in 2020. So
yeah. But we're still running our contest on Instagram. We are so stinking close to 100 followers.
Go follow us on Instagram, guys. You can win.
Yes,
come on.
Please. And once we get 150 reviews on Apple Podcasts, which we're not close to, please go review us.
Yes.
You may win a pin, a sticker, and a $10 gift card to a coffee shop of your choice. You want Starbucks, you want Dunkin', you want your little local coffee shop. Sure, just let us know.
Yes.
And then also that Instagram is Caffeinated Crimes Pod. We are now on Facebook and Twitter. So Facebook, we are Caffeinated Crimes Podcast. On Twitter, we're Caff Crimes Pod. That's CAFF Crimes Pod, because Twitter would not let us put Caffeinated Crimes. It was too long.
Yes.
So go follow us both those places as well. And then if you want to email us, it's caffeinatedcrimespod@gmail.com. And if you feel so inclined, if you want a little bit more content, go ahead and go to patreon.com/caffeinatedcrimes, and you can so generously give us money if you feel that we deserve it, and you can get some more bonus content.
Yes.
Okay, I think that's it. So go have a cup of coffee.
And don't commit a crime.